Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of a podcast that has yet to be named about micro-budget filmmaking. My name is Matt. Joining me today is Josh.
I feel like we should just keep it nameless. Like, fuck it. Like, every week is like, hi, we have no name still.
We have no name. The only problem with that is we have to come up with thumbnails for the YouTube videos at some point in time. Well, we have to name it something. I just don't know yet.
Just call it You Name It. Welcome to the You Name It podcast. Call it whatever the fuck you want to podcast.
Maybe we'll have to make sure no one else is taking that. First, today I was like, oh, we should call Let's Fix It in Post or something like that. And then I Googled it and someone already took it. So there's already a podcast called Let's Fix It in Post. So I don't know, but we're back at some point in time. By the time people are listening to this podcast, we will have had a name. I don't know if it's a good name, and I don't really care. We're just going to have to buckle down and come up with something at some point.
I really wish we could have just gone with Canned Corn. Canned Corn was like the best name, and somebody took it.
I liked it, yeah, and somebody's already got it. It's apparently a very strange, weird podcast too. So it has nothing to do with filmmaking.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll figure out something. But for now, we have no name, and last week was all about introductions. So go back to the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel if you want to check out the first episode. We sort of introduced ourselves and discussed a little bit about our influences as directors and filmmakers. Very good conversation, I think. It was a 2-hour conversation. I re-listened to it today when I was sort of editing it a little bit more, and I thought it was a really good conversation back and forth. So this week, Josh, because each episode is going to be focused on a different aspect of filmmaking. Sometimes we will interview people. Sometimes we'll just, talk shop about various aspects of filmmaking. You came up with this week's topic. What are we talking about this week?
So I feel like after we talked last week, kind of the one thing we landed on was our favorite process of the whole filmmaking thing is writing. That's my favorite process. So I feel like why not start with the favorite? So we're talking about writing this week.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good topic to start with, regardless of whether or not that was our favorite aspect. Primarily because, this is what has to be done before you ever get to pre-production or anything in terms of making a movie. You have to have a script. You can't. I suppose you could make a movie where there is no script and you just ran around and did everything random. I'm sure Andy Warhol did something like that in the past. But
I've seen that done.
Yeah, but by and large, 99.9% of the time, you start with a story, then you hammer out the script, and then you sort of you go from there. And today we're going to talk about that whole process, like how you come up with ideas, what kind of challenges that you encounter as you're sort of writing that script. We touched a little bit last week. Do you write the script to the things that you have available to you, or do you write the script as grand as you possibly can and then try to work your way back from there? We'll discuss all of that sort of stuff this week. So, one other thing I'll say. So we kind of discussed, like last episode, we had this thing where we each asked each other 5 questions that neither one of us knew what the questions were going to be before the show. I think that's kind of a cool segment. I think that generated a lot of interesting discussion. And so I think, if you're cool with it, Josh, we'll keep that tradition alive going forward. Maybe not 5 questions, but maybe like 3 questions or whatever we come up with. We'll ask each other a question we're unaware of and unexpecting, and then sort of get our perspectives on that. Does that sound like a cool segment?
Yeah, I was able to come up with 2 because we just discussed this and decided on that this morning. So I had to ask my wife, like, if you were going to ask me questions, what would you ask me? So...
why did you marry me? No.
Yeah, I mean about writing. I already know the other answer to that question. But she was able to throw out some really good ones. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So you leaned on her like I leaned on Alyssa last week.
Yeah, I kind of pulled a you. I was like, fuck, I'm just going to ask my wife.
That's fine. Nothing. They are our better halves, and they are far more intelligent than we are, and they probably have a lot of better questions. Like, why do you guys continue to do this?
That was it. Yeah, why the hell are you doing this? Stop it.
What's interesting, that just generated to me an interesting idea. What if on a future episode, and I don't know how open your wife or my fiance would be to doing this, but what if on a future episode we had them on and they got to ask us questions that they wanted have always wanted to ask us or get out in the open in terms of our filmmaking, because I know my fiance has a very different perspective on this. It is a lot of like, why are you wasting your money on this? Why
Hmm.
is this anything that you even care about? And I think it would be kind of cool to bring them on in the future. I don't even think they've ever met each other, but just sort of bring them
Uh,
on.
no, they may have ran into each other maybe once at Prairie Lights,
Okay,
maybe,
yeah, maybe, yeah,
maybe. But I mean, I think it would be fun. If nothing else, that shit could go south real quick and just tank, and that
yeah,
would be my favorite episode of
yeah.
all time.
Like our
Um,
relationships literally dissolve on the episode. I mean, that's good
Pretty
radio.
much. That could be, yeah. I mean, why not? I was that's just like those are my favorite. Like the train wrecks are my favorite. So
Okay. Well,
why not?
you check with her. I'll check with Alyssa, and then we'll see if they have any interest in possibly in the future coming on and doing that show, because that would be a lot of fun. I think that would be a lot of fun.
In kind of along those same lines, take us out of the equation just for that episode. Throw our wives on, and they
Yeah.
can talk about just like what train wrecks of a life we've kind of chosen to do this,
Well,
and that could be just fun to listen to.
yeah, and what's interesting about that is people don't seem to realize like a lot of filmmakers. I mean, they're in relationships with other people, have no interest in this, but the hardships that are put on the significant others in the
Mm-hmm.
course of us trying to do this kind of stuff, right? Like, hey,
Right.
sorry, I can't see you for like the next 5 days because I'm doing this thing with my friends that's going to ultimately lead nowhere. Um, but
Yeah, yeah,
I'm doing
pretty much.
that kind of stuff, and oh, whether it's missing events or doing stuff like that, there is a cost to the
Yeah.
significant others, and their perspective would be really interesting on that. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
more than just financial. I mean, I have 3 kids. I've missed birthdays, I've missed holidays, I've missed a bunch of events, just for them. So, I mean, more than just financial, kinda
Yeah.
like you said,
Yeah, so
but
we'll put that
yeah.
on the docket, ladies and gentlemen. At some
Yeah,
point, we'll get a few episodes under our belt first, though.
yeah.
So,
Show up for the train wrecks. It'll be
yeah,
fun.
for sure. So today it's all about writing. Like you said, it's your favorite part of the process. It's always been my favorite part of the process in terms of just sort of getting everything started. The creation, the origin of what will ultimately become this long film cinematic journey that we go on. I'll default to you to sort of to start with this. I'll throw out a softball question.
Sure.
Um, when at what point in your life were you like, hey, I love to write. I want to be a writer.
Yeah, so I wrote, so when I was a kid, I used to write things a lot, like stories a lot. So it started when I was like a kid. I'm not gonna go back all the way to when I was a fucking child because this isn't a therapy session. But I used to. My brother did theater. My brother was a big theater kid, and I used to go see him do plays and stuff. And I would watch those and like kids plays and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's fun. And a lot of the time, it'd be like me seeing a play and then going home and then just like stealing that idea, but changing the names and kind of changing the story a little bit. Um, so not much has changed, to be honest with you. um, but yeah, I started like when I was a kid, but like actually like getting into writing. I mean, um, uh, in my late teens, early 20s is when I was like, okay, I want to like write. I wanted to write plays. I wanted to write for theater, which I kind of discussed a little bit about the last week, or on the last
Yeah.
podcast.
And you have
But
done that, correct? Like that's is that kind of where you started with the stuff, was writing for theater?
yeah, and then like I said, but like theaters are fucking expensive, and in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm guessing across the country, if you don't own or run a theater, it's hard to get space. It's either really hard to get space or it's really expensive to get space because you got to rent that space out. Um, so the last big play I wrote, I turned into a movie, because it was just like honestly, honest to God, it was cheaper to do it that way than it was to do and rent a theater space.
If you had your druthers, right, would you prefer to write plays or would you prefer to write stuff like film?
So I'd rather write plays, and I'll tell you why. It's not even really the process. It's live theater is a whole different beast. You can have 100 takes, making a movie. You go out there and do live theater, and shit can go south, and
Yeah.
you've got to be able to save it right there, because it's live. There's no redos. So, um, but just like in theater too, you get immediate feedback. So it's not 6 months to a year of making this movie, putting it out to one audience, and then you get feedback in a year. In a play, you write that shit in a week, you rehearse it for four, and a week later, 5 weeks later, you get immediate feedback. So, and I love movies, but I love live theater. So, I'd rather write for theater myself.
That's interesting because I always was curious about theater. I never was really involved with theater at all. In college, I took some theater courses, and I remember the theater kids being like the most stuck up, snobby elitist I'd ever met in my life.
You're
Uh,
not wrong.
no, I'll tell you a true story. So I was in a theater class, and was talking to this girl, 'cause she was one of the actor. I think she was in Medea. UNL did a production of Medea, which I thought was
Hmm.
awesome, and I love
Hmm.
Euripides, and I just love that stuff. And she was one of the actors in there, and I told her, I was like, oh well, hey, she was really good, and I was like, hey, I'm a filmmaker, and we do this stuff, and she looked at me like I was the most pathetic person in the world, and she goes, why would I do films? I'm in theater. Our art form is thousands of years old. I was like, okay, nah, this ain't for
Right.
me. This ain't for me.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting. I've always wanted to kind of write for because I feel like that would be like a challenge. Like, how do you deal with something like that? But when you're writing for a play, is your process changed in terms of how you are writing your story, or is it the same? Like, do you think, okay, this is a completely different medium, therefore when I'm coming up with a story, when I'm coming up with dialogue, it's got to be a completely different beast than if I'm writing a script for a movie?
Um, uh, I feel like uh you're writing a play, everything's more wordy, I guess. You're writing a lot of action and stuff for film. Play, you're in one space, and or at least the stuff that I would write. But a lot of plays, it's one space. It's not five, six, seven different locations. It's you're in one. um and a lot of the playwrights that I read and that I liked, it was one space. One of the people that I used to read, um was his name's Eric Bogosian. I love his shit. And it's just because it's wild, and it's not like it's not safe theater. Adam Rapp, it's not safe theater. They write stuff that's just not. Um, it's definitely not for everybody. Um, and there's no real safety net with the stuff that they write. It's vulgar shit, and I like it a lot. But um, yeah, so this, you're right. I I write a play, it's for one space and
Gotcha,
not seven different locations.
gotcha. Um, Interesting. So I guess a little bit about my backstory of writing. Just like you, it goes back to when I was a kid. I can remember in elementary school, I wrote this short story about Dino the dinosaur, and I must have been really into the Flintstones or something at the time because I had to have been like 6, 7 years old, something like that. But I wrote this story about Dino the dinosaur, and he was chasing this fly, and he ate this fly, and for whatever reason, I don't remember the context, I don't know the setting, what it was for, but it won an award. Kingsbury Elementary School in Redlands, Nebraska. It won an award, and it kind of went around a little bit locally to different schools because different stories would be shared around to different like elementary schools and stuff like that. And I just remember really loving the process. I don't know if that was exactly like when I was like, "Ooh, I love to write because I won this award and I thought it was fun or whatever it was," but that was a distinct memory that I had, and from like that point forward, I would write stuff all the time. And I love the idea of like creating something. I always thought that was really really fun to do. And my mom was always really really big on having me read, even when I was like 5 years old. Like literally, my middle name is Stephen because her favorite author is Stephen King, and she named me my middle name is Stephen for Stephen King, and she would give me Stephen King books when I was like 6 or 7,
Mm-hmm.
having me read through them. And when I didn't know what a word was or what it meant or something, I would go to her like, "What does this mean?" And she would explain stuff. So I was a voracious reader when I was younger, and which one of the things that's kind of like I feel like is a failing on myself now is I don't read as much as I should. I feel like I should carve out time in my life to like read novels and stuff every once in a while. But it's like
Right.
it just seems that when you get older, when you become an adult, there's just it feels like there's so much less time to do the stuff that you really want to do and that you feel like you should be doing. But when I was much younger, I used to read everything. And then when I started, seeing movies and stuff like that, that's kind of when it started clicking. Like, oh, I could turn some stories these stories that I write into actual movie scripts. Had no idea how to do it. When I wrote the script for A Ripper Runs Through It, for example, it was literally just like a page of direction and then just all the dialogue underneath it. And then scene two, just a page of here's the whole story outline, and then boom, all the dialogue underneath it.
Right. Yeah.
Didn't look anything like an actual movie script, a traditional one or anything like that. But that's kind of like how I got into it. I've always loved the writing process and coming up with ideas and interesting things. And I'm going to segue because I'm going to ask you my first question
Oh yeah, sure, go for
because
it.
this might actually be jumping the gun a little bit on what we'll discuss a little bit later on, but fuck it, I'm just going to throw it out there.
Yeah, fire away, man.
Do you believe in writer's block? And if so, what do you
Motherfucker.
do? What do you do to get past it?
That is literally on my goddamn list of
Are you
questions.
serious?
Now I gotta check that motherfucker off. Um, my wife was asking me, she's like, "Well, do you believe in writer's block?" And I was like, "My daily life is writer's block." So, I mean, yeah. Um, I don't know. Like for me, when I write, um, there's like a whole process that I go through before I start writing, so I can avoid writer's block. So every idea I come up with for a script, I ABC the whole thing out from scene to scene, from beginning to end, every single scene before I
Okay.
even pick and start typing everything out. Doesn't mean I don't have writer's block. It just means I know where I'm gonna go. But like
It's
uh,
easier to get where you want to go when you know the outline ahead of time.
100%. But with that being said, the script that you were reading yesterday, I've sat on that second draft for the last week, staring at a screen that already had the whole thing there, trying to re-edit and rewrite and redo, and was coming up. I think I was all week came up with nothing. Nothing. I couldn't figure out how to change it, how to word it better, how to. I mean, you read it, you know,
Well,
how to do things different. Even though I had notes and an idea in front of me, couldn't figure out. So I'll take a break. I'll watch a movie. I will just not stare at that for a little while. I'll walk around. It'll be still sitting kind of in the back of my brain. And then all of a sudden, like something will just kick and it'll spark. And I can't not go back right away and write that down. Or on my phone, I write notes. So if I'm not by my computer or if I'm not by a notebook, I'll go, here's a quick snippet of what I was just thinking about. So I don't lose it for later. Um,
Okay.
but
That's interesting because that's the complete opposite of what I do.
well, I can't
so,
wait.
so yeah, I think one of my biggest problems as a writer is that I do not do that ABC outline, right? I don't outline anything before I write it. Generally, what happens to me is I'm always thinking. Like I have one of these brains, like my fiance said, I have ADHD because I'm always bouncing all over the place from idea to idea. It's hard
Hmm.
for me to just sort of focus. I probably should be taking drugs or something that can make me focus on hook me up with some Ritalin or something like that
I'm right there with you, man.
so I can focus on one thing. It's very difficult for me. So I bounce all over the place at all times, which makes it really hard for me to write anything in a timely fashion. It's one of the reasons why I've leaned on our friend Tony Crumpton so often because I'll be like, I have this idea. I know I will not be able to write this before we're going to film in any way, shape, or form. Tony's talent, he's got a great, I mean, he's a super talented writer. One of his
Right.
big traits is he can knock out drafts like nothing. It's like, hey, I need a draft of this. Boom, it's done tomorrow. I have no ability to do that. So when I come up with an idea, and I do want to get to the question of where our ideas come from a little bit
Right.
later on, so don't let me forget about that because I just threw us into the deep end of the pool with no floaties on the very first question. So,
That's cool.
writer's block.
Nothing better than drowning.
Yes. Um, and if you think about it, that is kind of what writer's block is in a way, right? You feel like you're drowning, and
Hmm.
you cannot find your way out, and this whole thing is going to sort of implode on itself because it's like I'm a creative person. How can I not figure this out? And you at least have like an outline of where you want to go before you start running into walls. What I will do is I will have an idea, and I open up whatever document I got, like a Word document, for example. I start writing, and then as soon as I don't know where to go from there, I stop. And then it's like, well, I'm not going to keep writing this until the next thing comes to me. And so, like for example, the novel that I'm writing,
Hmm.
right? It's
Yeah.
I don't have an outline of where this novel's going to go. I have in my mind general things. I'm like, okay, I know, like I have a scene that I want to do. And it's like, okay, this scene has always been bouncing around in my head for years, and I want that, and I want this. But the nuts and bolts of how the story is going to go, it's like I don't really know until I start writing, and then I'll start writing something, and then I'll be like, no, that sucked, and then I'll delete it, and I'll try to
Yep.
go in a completely different direction with it, even just story wise. And that's why it takes me so long to write stuff, is because I hyper focus on not the work itself, but why I'm such a, useless idiot that I can't figure stuff out.
Right.
That's what I'm focusing on, and I get frustrated and I just set it to the side and I go do something else. And then at
You.
some
Oh,
point something will spark and I'm like, aha, and then I'll go back and I'll keep working on it.
do you have scripts that you've written that you're like, all right, this is gonna be like, I have this feature idea. Like, I'm gonna write a feature right now. I've got this great idea, and then you start writing it. And you go, all right, fuck it. This is now a short. I've done that a million times. Where
Yeah.
I think like I got this, 100-page script in me, and then I start writing it, and I go, this is not. There's no fucking way. Not in a million years am I gonna get a feature out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple feature length scripts that I'm just like I'll never be able to do these, which will tie into a question I'm going to ask you later on. But
Right.
in terms of I start writing something as a feature and like there's not enough material here. Yes, absolutely. There's been multiple cases where I start writing something. I'm like, no. I mean, I'm just padding this thing out just to reach 65 minutes or 70 minutes or something like that. But there's really
Right.
nothing there. And I think because we both write horror stuff
Right.
under the general cat umbrella of horror. I think both of us have written stuff that's got like comedy in it and some actiony stuff. And so I wouldn't consider myself like a straight horror writer. For whatever reason, people seem to think that I have a talent for comedy. I hate comedy. Like I hate watching comedies. I hate writing comedies. Yet somehow, people watch Shivers Down Your Spine or Chills Down Your Spine. They're like, this is hilarious. It's great. And I'm like, wow, it just makes me mad. I'm like, when you feel like people tell you have a talent in something that you don't want. Like, I don't want that
Right.
talent. Can't I have the talent of that I'm interested in? Why why would I be
Right.
talented in something I have zero interest in? So yeah, absolutely. You start writing something and then you're like, this would just be better to turn this into a short film. Convention Girl was one. The idea of Convention Girl, Tony ended up writing that short sort of story. I think it was Convention Girl. It might have been a different one in Shivers. There's so many different films that I
Mm,
have done. One of
right.
those Shivers things, I was like, oh yeah, this will be a big. My initial concept, oh, we could turn this into a feature, and then it was just like, no, it's much better as sort of a short project. So
Right.
yeah, that definitely happens for sure.
Um, I'm gonna kind of segue into something. It's not really a question. It's just kind of a list
Oh, hold
of
on, hold
things
on,
that.
hold
Oh,
on.
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't answer my own question, and I wanted to make
Oh,
sure I touched on that before
yeah.
we moved on to the next thing. Does writer's block exist? I absolutely believe that writer's block exists because there's definitely been times when I'm just. It doesn't matter how long I sit in front of a computer screen, how much A lot of times I will lay down to go to sleep and my mind is just racing and thinking
Mhm.
about the script itself and constantly going through different permutations and how do I get from A to Z, and nothing comes to mind at all. Like I literally have nothing to write. No story, no dialogue, no anything, and it just doesn't happen. I know our friend Tony does not believe that writer's block exists, but I think it does for some people. Some people might be blessed enough to never have writer's block. They just,
Right. Yeah.
I'm not one of those people. And it sounds like you are not one of those people either. So
No.
good on you
Um,
if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, writer's block doesn't exist. But yeah, from personal experience, multiple times, it's like, what? I don't know what to do here. I go 3 weeks without doing anything. And then something happens. Like, for example, not bed and breakfast, birthday dinner from Original Shivers with Eric
mhm.
Moyer and Michelle
Yep.
Schrage. I saw there was a school shooting, and I saw a news thing about a school shooting, and for whatever reason, it's not like I was intentionally being like, aha, I have this great idea for a movie idea. For whatever reason, that day, this thing came to me. I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if you had this couple, husband and wife, talking back and forth. They're disciplining their child on their birthday, and it turns out they're eating their own child.
Yeah.
And I remember sending an email to Eric. And this script, I knocked this out in like 2 hours. Like the whole concept just came to me, and a boom, 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 I knocked it out. And that never happens. That's so rare that happens with me. And I remember emailing Eric and Michelle, and I'm like, hey, I'd love to have you guys in this. I know. I mean, this came to me after a school shooting. I know this is very disturbing, the whole like material here, but it's like going to be like a dark comedy in a way. And tell me, because I love Michelle and Eric, they're great, and they
Right.
were fully on board with it. And then when we ended up filming it, it took 2 hours to film because you know them, they're pros, like they're
Yeah.
actual pros. They know the lines, they have everything ready to go, and boom, that was the shortest film shoot I'd ever done. And I still really like that short film,
Yeah.
birthday dinner. So yeah, it just I don't know where. I don't know how you get past writer's block. I think for me personally, it just kind of happens. Sometimes when I least expect it.
Tony's a super talented writer, so I can see how he cannot believe in writer's block. Especially if he writes like you say he writes, where you can literally give him an idea and he'll get it to you the next day. Um,
Yeah, and I've tried to do stuff like I've never actually written. Well, that's not true. I've read a book by Dan O'Bannon on screenwriting. I remember in high school reading a little bit of that Stephen King on writing or whatever he wrote
mhm.
about it. And I've seen stuff where it's like, well, you just sit down and force yourself to write X amount of words a day. Um,
Right.
I've tried that. Like none of that works for me.
No.
Because I will sit down, I'll write a bunch of words, but then I'll hate all of them. And then
Yeah.
I delete them, and I'm like, wait, this was a waste of time. I don't want this to go this way. Like I spent 2 hours writing all this, stuff, and I don't like any of it. And I'd rather just personally wait until I know what I need and then go from there.
I started reading that book, How to Write a Film in 21 Days, and it puts you through all these exercises. And then I just found myself skipping. all the exercises because I didn't have the patience to
Yes.
read it and do them.
Maybe
And
you
then I
have
was like, oh,
ADHD like me or something
I
like
got to
that.
the I 100% have that. Diagnosed champion. Yeah, I'm proud of it. But I got to the end of that book and I was like, how the fuck do these people do this? Like, I can't write a movie in 21 days.
Yeah.
Toss that book. So
It's so difficult. I don't know. Where
yeah,
are we in this conversation? See, we're already ADHD and all over the place. So we talked
yeah.
about writer's block. I'll throw it to you. What's the next sort of writing topic you want to
Well,
bring up?
because you kind of brought it up a little bit. Do you write better um, alone, or do you prefer collaborating with other writers to kind of come up and finish a script? How
Yeah,
what is your preference? What would you rather kind of do?
that is an outstanding question. And again, I'm going to go back to my answer of last week. The answer with my heart, and the practical answer, which is personally, I like to write by myself.
Mhm.
I have this thing, and this is even with the films themselves. As I evolved as a filmmaker, early on with Dead Lantern, it was all me, right? I wrote everything, I directed everything, I edited everything. I basically did that process all by myself. And I even consider when we get to our episode on editing, editing is a version of writing because you are writing that film just with the images that you shot. And so that's another reason why I think I like to edit because I do consider it an aspect of the writing process and
Mhm.
creating the story within, the images that you've shot. Um, I prefer to write everything myself and do everything myself because then I'm in my head I'm saying this is mine, and if there's anything wrong with this, I own it. Right?
Right.
It's what I have done and I have created, warts and all. If it's good, great. If it's bad, it's bad. I know the blame, any credit or blame for the script resides with me alone. Right? However, I also, as I grew in my filmmaking career, I realized, I have to be able to rely on other people. Like, for example, I rarely ever will send a script out for anybody to read and review. Like what you did with your script to me. Like,
Mhm.
very rarely would I ever say, "Hey, I have this full Western script. Read this, Josh. Tell me what you think and give me all this feedback on it."
Right.
Because when I write something, it's very personal to me, and so what happens in my head, and I'm not arguing that this is something that is logical and I should think this way. All I'm saying is this is how I think. When I look at a script that I've written and I send it to someone and then somebody else tells me, no, I didn't like this or change this or you should do this, I'm like,
Right.
you are cutting up my baby. Like you're
Right.
you're just cutting my baby up by 1,000 cuts, and it makes me feel bad about what I've written. I'm like, well, clearly what I've written sucks, and people don't like it, and
Yep.
so I have to do all this to fix it. And so for a long time in my filmmaking career, I was very stubborn. I was like, nope, I'm not going to do this, and this is just how it's going to be. But then you sort of grow as a filmmaker, right? And then you got to be able to realize what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And like I said, I found out, realize my weakness is dialogue. I need somebody to look at the dialogue and punch up the dialogue. You
Mhm.
know, I still resent when someone looks at something I've done and like, oh, you should change the story, and you should change this to this. That makes me mad. Like, because again, that's just my own personal thing. I'm like, this is my story. I'm very protective of the stories that I come up with. But now when it comes to dialogue and stuff like that, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm like that's not my forte. And if the actor can improve it by at read throughs throwing out a different line or saying, hey, I'm going to compress this, or can I do this, I'm cool with that. But you try to
Right.
rewrite my story and it's saying, well, how about you do this instead? Then I get sort of against it. But there's
Yeah.
an aspect of collaboration that I really like. I love collaborating with Tony on various stuff, but it's got to be things that I'm okay with collaborating on. You know,
Yeah, and I'm gonna table that part where you talk about trying different lines of dialogue. I'm gonna come back to that.
Okay.
But for me, I have to I walk right on that line. Like I tightrope that shit every time I write something. Um, because I like to first draft everything by myself. That way there's nobody living in my head. There's nobody saying, well, don't write this. I want you to write, let's try this. Don't do this. Let's do that. That first draft I always do by myself. Um, but I also know I write a super garbage first draft. And that's just to get it down on paper. That's what I tell everybody. I'm like, just get it down on paper, because your it's not your final draft. It's your first
Yeah,
draft.
it's alive
Uh,
at that point. Like in your mind, it's everyone's like, okay, this is a real legitimate thing now. It has been
right,
written down. It is in existence.
right. Um, but then I do things kind of like you said you didn't do, where I'll fish, like I'll send out a hook. Anybody want to read this shit? And it's like it's not strangers. I'd never throw this shit out to a stranger because I'd get decimated. So I throw it out to my friends who are like, oh, this piece is okay, and this piece is okay. Um, but then they like just fucking crack my neck. Sometimes also. You read that thing last night? And I was like, oh, like every time you'd send like, oh, this was kind of funny. Oh, this kind of worked. You'd send like two good things and then like 1,000 daggers. Um, but again, that's what I want. That's what I fish for. I don't want the compliments. I want all the things that are wrong with it. And they might not be wrong in my mind because I wrote them down. So clearly they're not wrong.
Yeah.
But fresh eyes have to see this. If you
Yep.
set a script for 2 months and you're the only one staring at it, you got to give it to somebody. You need fresh eyes, or nothing's going
Yeah.
to change. It's
Not
not going to get any better.
not everybody is Quentin Tarantino and can just knock
Mhm.
out a script and be like, it's awesome from the jump. You know, it takes work to do this kind of stuff, and it's hard. It's a long process as well because,
Yeah.
we were talking last week a little bit about how actors and crew members their sort of worldview of making a movie is the finite amount of time that they're on set. Yeah, they might be on set for a 15-hour day and they're like, "Man, that was hard,
Right.
It's hard to make a movie." How many hours do we spend trying to get the story and the script right before
Hmm.
even get it to a point when we show it to anybody, right? You're just
Right.
kind of like, I don't think people have a good appreciation of the amount of hours that goes into just trying to get a concept off the ground that you're excited about, and then getting yourself to the point where you're writing it all out,
Hmm.
rewriting it, doing multiple. Because by the time someone sees one of my scripts, it ain't after the first draft. I mean, I've done like 8, 9, 10 drafts of this thing, and
Right.
then
Yeah.
I feel comfortable. If it gets to the point where I feel comfortable to let somebody read it, which is a long time, then
Right.
I'll send it out, for that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a very sort of time-consuming process. Like I love it, but I hate it at the same time. I
Hmm.
wish I had the ability to just I have the idea, crank out the script, and boom, go. But that is not how it works for me at all.
Right.
It's the most frustrating aspect of it, in my opinion. Even
And
though I love it.
sending that shit out too, especially to writers, is a like a weirdly like it's a vulnerable thing.
Yeah, you're
Um,
terrifying,
where
terrifying.
you're like, okay, I wrote this thing. Here it is. Just would you mind reading it? Check it out. Tear it apart. Do whatever you do. And the cool thing too was, again, I'm gonna keep referring back to that thing I sent you last night. You sent things that were like great ideas that I'm gonna fucking steal now and put in my shit. That's just it. But again, that's another reason I kind of fish. I go, hey, read this thing, and then people go, hey, like, I really like this part, but if you tweak it and try this, and sometimes things will go, no, that's shit, and I'm never gonna do that. And sometimes you'll have weird little like gold nuggets in there that you're like, I'm totally gonna fucking steal that, and I'm gonna put my name down as a writer, and I'm not gonna give that person credit ever. Um, it, that's just how it's gonna go. Um,
Okay, well,
so
thanks for giving me the heads up.
you're welcome. uh,
But no, I think that's another important aspect of the writing process. When you are writing something, you are so close to it, right? Because it's your concept, it's your story, and it's so difficult to jump that hurdle of allowing somebody else, because you don't want anybody to tell you that the thing that you created yourself is a piece of shit. You don't want people to say that. Um,
Right.
just like a parent probably doesn't want another parent to be like, your kid's an asshole.
Right.
You don't see it, or you choose to ignore it, but you don't want that. And so it's so difficult to hand that over because you don't know what the reaction is going to be, and you have to be able to have some stones and self confidence in yourself to say, okay, if I send a script to Josh and Josh says, this sucks, and this sucks, change it. Am I going to wilt like a flower, or am I going to say, no, fuck you on this? I'm going to keep my vision on this, but okay, I can accept that your point of view is correct on this, and sort of modify it. I mean, you have to be able as a creative person to be able to take criticism without being a complete whiny crybaby, because you're never going to improve yourself as a filmmaker, as a writer, if you can't take criticism.
Right.
And so that's a big aspect, but it's hard, man. It's hard, like when you send that first thing over, like for example, the novel that I'm writing. I sent emails to a bunch of my close friends, and I was like, "Hey, I am writing this novel. Um, I'm going to send you the first chapter, because I'm not going to send everybody, like, I'm not going to do the whole novel and then send it to them to read. I'm just going to send them the first chapter." And what I said was, I don't care. Like, I don't care if you think the story sucks. I don't care if you think the dialogue sucks. I don't care. That's not the type of criticism I'm looking for, because this first novel that I'm writing, I'm gonna write it for me, right? I don't care if it's bad. I don't care if the dialogue sucks. I'm just writing it for myself to show myself I can do it and I can actually
Right.
complete it, and I'm not interested in criticism on any of that aspect. I was like, all I'm really interested in is, when you read it, does it make you interested to continue reading? Is the world that I'm kind of setting up something that you're like, okay, this seems cool, and I'm interested in where it's going to go? Again, I could care less if the dialogue sucks, and I could care less about,
Right.
do you think the story beats work? Maybe on a future novel, if I get there, that's something I'll take into consideration. But the first one's for me, and it's for
Yeah.
my personal thing alone. And I'm obviously going to send it to you once I have this sort of first chapter really fully fleshed out how I want it to be. And that's
Right.
that's that's what I want. I just want I just and if everyone comes back to me and says, we're not interested, we're not in, this seems stupid and uninteresting entirely, then I'm going to sort of question, well, is this the novel that I should be writing, right? Or am I just going to say, fuck it, this is the story I'm interested in, which is where I'm leaning towards, right? This is kind of the story.
100%.
This is a story that I want to write. If nobody else is interested in it, I'm going to. You're a human being. You're going to get those thoughts that go through your head. Well, should I write this? Maybe I
Hmm.
should do something completely different. My opinion is like, fuck that. I'm going to write the
Yeah.
thing that I want to write, and maybe none of my friends like it, or they don't care about it whatsoever. That's fine. I care about it. It's
Right.
mine. It's for me, and it's for my sort of self satisfaction that I did it and I created this thing. And you never know, when I put it out there in the world, there could be other people that say, you know what, this is cool. There's always going to be people that like your stuff.
Right.
That's the thing. Whether it's your final, like for example, and I won't go into too much detail, but there's a short film that you made, and your consortium made, about a certain sort of mythological creature in a swimming pool, that
Oh
I that
yeah.
I was allowed to see, and
Right.
it was, what I was told was, this is garbage, this is crap, we're never going to release this. I watched it and I liked it. I was like, I actually like this. This is cool. And so, there's always going to be people out there that will like your stuff, even if the majority doesn't. And, you know,
Right. I used
that's,
to take all that shit to heart, and now I'm just like, kind of like you. I'm like, well, fuck you. I made this shit for me. I don't care what you think.
yeah.
And that's not 100% true, because there's a part of you that's like, oh man, they didn't like my shit. Um,
Yeah, that's
but
that's natural human emotion, right? Because you
um,
want to make something good, and you're like,
right.
oh, they hated it.
Uh, but at the end of the day, like film wise, at least, I'm gonna put that shit on my shelf, and when I'm 60, 70, 80 years old, I'm gonna pull that shit off the shelf and I'm gonna watch it, and I'll be like, that was a cool time. Like that was fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And how many people, honestly, we're not even talking about a film, like making a finished film. How many people can honestly say in this world, like, hey, man, I wrote a movie script?
right,
I had an idea, I had a concept, and I followed through and did it all the way to completion. There is a certain level of not only satisfaction, but just human growth that comes from being able to do something like that.
right,
Take away whether or not you think it's a good script or a bad script or if it could go anywhere. Just the fact that you were able to execute an idea to completion is something. It says something about you as a person. You're like, okay, not only was I able to do this, I struggled, I overcame the struggle of doing this, and hey, man, I did something for me, and it's a value to me. It's a valuable experience to me personally in my life,
yep,
that I was able to do it. And hey, and sometimes people say, cool, I want to do this again, and I want to do it again, and that's kind of where we go from there, I guess.
right. Um, I wanted to, because when you kind of were answering that question, you put out, you were talking about how when you do a table read with actors, you kind of leave it, oh, you can try this and you can try this and you can try this. So it's kind of the answer to what I'm going to bring up, but I'm just curious how close you are to your material when you get to a table read. So, um,
Well, one's
do
coming
you let
up next
people
month, right?
right? Do no, no, this yeah, I don't even know what fucking month we're in right now. It's January. Do you let actors deviate, or do you say, "Hey, I want you like I am, like I this every line of dialogue is fucking gold, and if you change it, you're fired." You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah, yeah. I'm not that way at all with dialogue because obviously, I've said again, dialogue is my weakness. So if anyone can make the dialogue better, whether that be another writer or an actor or whoever it may be, the janitor, in the hotel where the reading's taking place, whatever it may be, I am all for someone making it better because ultimately, filmmaking, when you're making a film, that's a collaborative process. Um, yes, my major is film studies, and we had to study auteur theory, the French auteur theory and stuff. I don't buy into any of that bullshit. Yes, Quentin Tarantino makes a movie, for example. He's probably the closest thing to an auteur that the majority of people in America would be like, ah, that's a Quentin Tarantino movie, right?
mhm,
Um, Quentin Tarantino can't do all of that by himself. He's got an entire team of hundreds, if not thousands, of talented people that are getting him the things that he needs. Yes, he's an extremely talented individual. I'm not saying that. But I'm
right,
saying he's not doing it by himself. It's not just him with the script and the camera setting up all the lights and doing all that stuff. He's got to have a collaborative team around him to be able to sort of execute this vision of his. And it's the same way with a script or writing in general. I think, in my opinion, when you're writing a film script and you have that read through, that first read through, normally what I say is up top. I'm like, hey, any dialogue in this is fair game. I cast you guys because I feel like you bring value to this project. Okay,
mhm,
you have unique talents that I don't have. I could certainly never be an actor. Never could be an actor. And I always tell
no,
actors this. I'm like, how brave that is to be an actor, to put yourself in front of a camera, to entrust yourself with whoever's behind the camera. Sometimes, like, they don't really know the directors. Might be the first time they ever working with the director. They have no clue if this
right,
director knows what they're doing, if this film will ever come out. I mean, a lot of films don't ever come out, or how they're going to be portrayed on screen because they're not in the editing room. They don't know what kind of angles that the director is going to choose and things of that one for the final outcome. They literally put their trust and faith in the director, and they go along for the ride, and they hope that the final piece is something that they can be proud of. So I always tell the actors, I want you invested in this film, and the way that you are invested in this film is through your characters. So change it, make it better. You know more about speaking than I do. right?
Hmm.
Talking to other human beings. You guys have been in plays. You guys have been in other productions. You guys are far more outgoing and extroverted than I am. I am an introvert. That's
Yep.
what I
Right.
am. So I
Yep.
don't go out and hang out with people at bars all the time and have these sort of interactions with other human beings that I then sort of, take with me to be able to write into scripts and stuff. I don't do that. That's not the kind of human being I am. So I rely on these other people because if you're an actor, you are generally an extroverted personality. You are comfortable around people, you are outgoing with people, you have different interactions with people that I don't have any knowledge of. So bring that to the dialogue. Change it how you want. So we'll normally go through the entire script once, and then we go through it scene by scene. So we will read through the whole script however I wrote it, and then we'll go, okay, so now we're going to go to scene 1. Let's read through scene 1, and then boom, at the end of scene 1, okay, let's all have a powwow, so to speak. What can be changed? What ideas do you guys have to bring the dialogue, to punch the dialogue up? And then
Right.
we'll go through, we'll change the dialogue on that scene, we'll read through it, we will identify, wow, that's really good. Okay, that's way better. Boom, then go on to scene 2, etc., etc., and do that same
Right.
process. That's kind of how and scripts are always living documents. Even on set, a great idea can spark a creative outlet. So I never say the script is set in stone. I always say it's a living document, and from the point of the script read through, all the way to when we're on set that day, if you have a great idea to come up with a better line of dialogue or a different action for your character to take, bring it up and we'll do it.
100%. Yeah. Kind of the same thing. Um, I send those scripts out, a week or so before we do a read through, and just tell everybody in when I send those out, hey, this is just like dialogue, like roadmap. Like if you come to the read through and you have something better or you want to try something, um, I'm a try everything kind of person. So I just tell everybody this is what's written down, but do it however you feel like your character would kind of do it. So yeah, I'm definitely open to play whenever we do a read through.
Yeah,
Um,
and this extends just a bit to on set, right? Because
mhm.
when you're on set, and let's say we've gone through the whole process, and we're literally it's day of when we're filming, and an actor comes up with a new line of dialogue. I will allow them. I will film it their way, but I'll also have them film it my way because that
Right.
also helps in the editing sessions. If I have
Right.
multiple options, I mean, there have been times when an actor has been on set and be like, "Hey, I want to do it this way," and on set, I'm thinking that is not going to work. That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And why would I ever do this? However, I don't ever say that to him.
You
What I do,
should.
what I maybe I should. I'll do that to Eric Moyer sometimes. Like
Yeah.
that is a stupid thing, Eric. What do you think about? But no, you don't want to ever stifle creativity, ever in
Yeah.
any context. That's my motto, and I tell everybody up front. I will never stifle your creativity. I might think in my head that's a stupid fucking idea, and there's no way I'm going to use that in the final
Yeah.
cut. But I'm never going to stifle creativity. I'm going to allow you to do your thing. Now, that's gone both ways. When I'm in the editing room, sometimes I'm like, "Yep, I was damn right. That was a stupid idea. there's no way.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm putting that in the film. I'm going to use the cut from the actual script. That's what we're going to do." But then there's other times that I'm like, "Holy shit! I thought that was so stupid, but it worked.
Right.
It played so well, and that cut or that take of dialogue that the actor wanted to do. That's way better than what I thought. I didn't know it until I pieced it all together in the final thing, and so those little things happen as well. So
Right.
it's
The
kind
only
of crazy.
thing the only thing I ask people to do if they're gonna change the dialogue on set is to do it the same way every time. Because sometimes they'll come up
Mm,
with an idea and I'm like, yep, that's totally try that and let's do that. But do that, don't do that, and then that same thing, 4, 5, 6 different variations of it,
yeah,
because it's gonna fuck me up.
yeah.
um, so that's the only thing I ask people to do. Um, when we're
Yeah.
on set doing it is just
Yeah.
do it that way, just that way every time.
Yep. I don't necessarily have that problem because you know me, I shoot a million angles of everything. So
Yeah, I know.
I will do like 15 takes of a line of dialogue, all from different angles. And so even if they do something a little different, I know I'm going to have enough coverage to cut around to whatever I need to cut around to. So
Yeah. I'm gonna plant my feet. You get two angles and two tries. Moving on. I'm kidding. I don't do that.
all right, so one question that I did have that I want to throw out, and this might be the hardest question of all.
Oh, can't wait.
Yeah, love to throw the hardball questions at you. Is how do you come up with an idea in the first place? So, what is sort of the thing? Is it something where you're just kind of like spontaneously you're sitting around one day and something comes into your mind that you're like, oh, it's just a little kernel, and then you start moving outwards to try to figure out how to do that kernel? Is it, hey, I've seen a movie and something in the movie has inspired me and I want to take an aspect of the film and then extrapolate it further from there? How do you come up with your initial ideas and concepts that you become passionate about and that you want to continue, the long process of turning it into something?
I steal
Easy
like a
one.
motherfucker.
Yeah, just easy one.
Um,
Just easy question for you there.
yeah. No, I think a lot of it comes from watching um other people's work. And there's a snippet that comes out of that I'm like, I can I think I can riff off of that. Somebody told me when I first started writing and making movies, they're like, steal everything, steal shit. If you think there's an original movie out there, I'd love to see it because it doesn't exist. It's somebody's gonna watch your shit and go, "Oh, I saw that in that movie," and it's like 1 minute of your whole movie that they saw in another movie, and they
Yeah.
go, "This movie isn't yours."
It's like the hero's journey, right? How many thousands of movies have been done with the hero's journey as the basic story outline?
um, but yeah, a lot of the time it's just like, um, to me too. Sometimes it's like, well, since I write just horror stuff, I'm like, what in the horror subgenre have I not done? Um, and so I had never done a slasher film before. I'd never done a horror comedy before, so I was like, let's try to take those two things and smash them together and see what happens. At one point, I'd never done a ghost story before, and so I try to tackle things that I've never done before, also, just to kind of keep it fresh, interesting, I guess, for myself.
Well, yeah, that's real. I think that you and I are more similar than we may seem,
Uh-huh.
because that's very similar to me. Like for example, the anthologies I did, Shivers Down Your Spine and Chills Down Your Spine. Every film in those anthologies is something completely different, right? I've got vampires and ghosts and
Mhm.
grim reapers and burlesque murder mysteries, nudie cuties, like everything you could possibly imagine was in there. And one of the main reasons why I wanted to do those anthologies is because, getting kind of circling back to one of your points earlier is, hey, have you ever written something you're like, this has got to be a short, I can't turn this into a feature length film. I had the opportunity to basically have like taste all these different flavors in
Mhm.
short film formats and do everything I kind of wanted to do. Right, whether it's a killer ventriloquist doll movie, for example, always
Mhm.
want to do something like that, or a gothic sort of nudie cutie sort of thing. Uh, Always wanted to try something like that to see how it would look on screen and do that kind of stuff. And I had the ability to do that kind of stuff, playing around with just random weird ideas. We'll use Bed and Breakfast as an example. Bed and Breakfast
Right.
is that sort of gothic nudie cutie that was in Chills Down Your Spine. Now, I had seen a short film on YouTube by a director named Harrison Marks that starred this like 50s, 60s pinup icon named June Palmer. That was in the nudie cutie genre, and basically what this, and you can still see it. It's on YouTube. It's called Escape from Elm Manor, I think, or Flesh and Fantasy. That's another name for it.
Mhm.
And I had watched this, and I was like, man, wouldn't this be? I mean, the basic storyline is this woman shows up at an old mansion, kind of like a bed and breakfast sort of thing, and she rents a room and she wakes up, naked. She's being hunted by this sort of ghoul chasing her around this thing. It's a nudie cutie, of course, so it's just a girl running around sort of topless. And at the very end, it turns out she wakes up and it's like a bad dream, and she survives and she goes on her way. It's just this quick, like 3 or 4 minute short film, and I watched it and I was like, there's a cool idea here to do something horror based, like an actual, hey, not just show a naked girl wandering around, but actually to try to make it a little scary and have like a actual ghoul chasing her around and what would happen. So you're still homaging this sort of genre and this film that this guy named Harrison Marks did, but you're deviating from the story quite considerably. In the original film, it's just a guy. It's just like a guy that works there that kind of shows up and chases her around. But in my film, I'm like, no, let's have this ghoul like actually be a ghoul, and let's show him like actually killing other people and chopping heads off and all that stuff. And when she wakes up in my film, she wakes up and you think it's kind of like a dream, but it's actually not really a dream. She gets spoiler, she gets an axe to the forehead and killed,
Hmm.
and all of this stuff. And so I took inspiration from that short little 3 minute movie and turned it into a 15-minute thing. And that one was in black and white. I wanted mine to be very colorful, kind of Giallo esque from the 70s. So I took a lot of different things that I had seen, the Mario Bava esque colorful, super colorful lighting all over the place, and combined it with this sort of gothic atmosphere that I really liked from the Harrison Marks thing. And I feel like it turned out really well personally. I feel like it's one of the best things like visually that I was able to put out. But that's kind of where it comes from for me. Sometimes I'll see something and it just triggers this completely different idea, and
Hmm.
I like a springboard from that. Other times, I'll just come up with something. Like I have this very, I don't even want to give out the name of it because I don't want anybody to steal the name because I love the name. I'm terrible at naming things. As you can tell, we haven't even come up with a name for this podcast yet.
Right.
But I really love the name of this, and I don't want someone to steal it. But that was just something I came up with on my own. I was just, one day I just love to think. It helps me to go to sleep, to just try to think about things in my head, and I was thought about, oh, wouldn't this be cool? One aspect is in Shivers Down Your Spine. Deadbolt is a perfect example. Deadbolt was one of the very first things we shot for Shivers Down Your Spine. Very amateurish, but I was sitting in my apartment with my fiance, and she was like, "Did you lock the deadbolt to the front door?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." She's like, "Well, can you go check it?" I'm like, "No, I know I did it." She's like, "But can you please go check it?"
Hmm.
So I went and I
Right.
checked, and the deadbolt was not locked. And I was like, holy shit. And then I started thinking, wow, how scary would it be if she was there by herself and the deadbolt kept unlocking itself? Right? If
Right.
she went over and locked the deadbolt and went and sat down, and then like maybe she heard the click, and then she looked back and the deadbolt was unlocked, and she looked through the peephole and there was like nobody there. Opened the doors, nobody there. But every time she locked it, it would unlock itself. And just that sort of kernel led to Deadbolt, the short film that we did. So you can
Right.
get it from everything, I think.
Yeah, I definitely have, uh some of the things I've written I will never shoot. And that's just because they're personal to me and I don't want to put that out and people be like, you're fucked up. So I wrote something that was a reoccurring nightmare I had when I was a kid. That was just fucking terrible. But I wrote that. I'll never shoot it. But I wrote it down. And
That's
that's just
that's a perfect segue into my question for you, which was there anything that you've ever written that you know you'll never ever write? So you just answered my question for you.
yeah, 100%. I had a reoccurring nightmare when I was a kid. I took that reoccurring nightmare though, and um, changed the actual like uh, idea. But I mean that nightmare's in there. Um, wrote that down, but like I said, I will never put that out to the world because I just don't want people to know how fucked up I am. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I've written stuff as well that I'm like I don't ever want this out. Not because necessarily I think it's fucked up, but because it's just so personal to me. It's like whether it relates to events that happened to me when I was younger, or something things that happened to other people. Like I'll tell you something that was terrifying for me. Lisa Cavanda. So we have a mutual friend who's an awesome writer. Her name is Lisa Cavanda.
Mm-hmm.
She worked on Remission, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's worked on multiple Dead Lantern projects, and there was a one of the films for Shivers Down Your Spine was a film called Last Breath, and it starred our friend Jasmine. And it was I didn't write it. We can talk about that another time. But basically, what
Right.
happened, it was like immediately we had to film something. We had like 5 days. I knew, based on everything that the listeners now know from this podcast, I could not write something that fast. So I had to rely on a friend. And Lisa was like, "Oh, I'll write something for you." And then it turned out that script was something very personal, like that had happened to a friend of hers, and it was just like a real thing that kind of happened. And it
Right.
involves suicide and all of this stuff. I didn't even know that at the time, like initially going on. Then she told me, I was like, oh my god. Then it just added all this pressure on me to film it because I was like, I do not want to fuck this up, you know.
Right.
So I mean, it was a giant because it's her script, right? Like, how do you? And I don't even know if this is the right podcast to touch on this, but directing other people's stuff. Have you ever directed like another writer's script,
Um,
or have you only
I
ever done your own?
I want to say I have.
Did you ever direct anything that Tony wrote or anything for a Flatwater Terrors project?
Um, I was originally supposed to direct his. He wrote a short that had no name. We ended up naming it, not rewriting it, but we named it. I'm trying to think of the fucking name of that. But I can't remember it now.
Well, while you think about it, I'll just touch base on this Lisa thing while you think about this and see if you've had any that you've directed in other people. But there is an insane amount of pressure to do that because whether it's Tony's scripts or Lisa's scripts, especially in this case of Lisa's, which was a very personal story for her, you do not want to screw that up. And so that process was constantly, she was on set for a lot of it, as much as she could be there. And, I would constantly go to Lisa like, Lisa, what do you think of this? Would if I did this directorial decision, how do you feel that would impact your script, et cetera, et cetera? You have that really collaborative process with a writer who's on set. That's a million times different than even writing or directing something when the writer's not there. Like for example, if Tony was ever on set at a time that I was directing one of his scripts, I think he'd have a meltdown. He'd probably be like, "What the hell are you doing?" Right? Because it's
Right.
when the writer's not there standing next to you, it's a lot different filming a script than someone else's script than when the writer's right there with you
Right.
and the whole collaborative process that you have to do. But it's wild, man. It's wild trying to, when another person's script comes to you, do you rewrite it? Like if you're like, okay, I have your script, Tony, but I don't like this, and I'm going to rewrite this, because I've done that, and
Right.
I know how it feels when I'm a writer and someone does that to me, and so I know how it feels to them. But then it's like you both have to get over the fact that this is like a collaborative thing, and I always say up front to writers, I'm like, if a writer ever wants to collaborate with me, like on Dead Lantern Pictures, I'm like, hey, you got to know that I'm strongly opinionated in my sort of quote unquote vision of how this should go, and you got to know up front that things are going to be changed. Ultimately, as a director, I've got to, in order for me to be invested in this, I have to be passionate about whatever I'm filming. If you're giving me a script and I'm like, I don't really want to film this, the film's going to turn out like shit. I have to be able to really want to make this movie, and part of that is collaborating on the script writing, like you said. You have to be able
Right.
to have that self-awareness that, okay, it's going to be changed, a little bit, and I have to be comfortable with that. When someone changes a script that you've done, do you feel like that's no longer your film anymore? Like that, okay, this is just, let's say you were to, like, well, here's an example. We have a friend, Pete O'Brien.
Right.
Um, I submitted a script for Flatwater Terrors. It was called The House on Peach Avenue, I think,
Right. Yep.
and which is actually on YouTube right now. So I encourage any listener out there, if you want to see a really cool Nebraska filmmaker, check out Peter O'Brien's Visually
Hmm.
Hidden. He's got a bunch of short stuff up there, and this film is one of them. And I ran a film festival. I didn't even mention this last week, but I used to run a Prairie Lights Film Festival.
Right.
And one of the things that I like to do with it is I said, hey, we have all of these writers in Nebraska that have all these scripts that it's hard as a writer to get your script. Like you said last week, you started Dream Awake and you
Right.
realized really right away nobody wanted to film your shit and you had to do
Right.
it yourself, and that's how you got into it.
Right.
And that's the way with a ton of writers. There's a lot of talented writers out there who have written scripts, but they don't know the first thing about how to get them made. They don't have any interest in being filmmakers. Sometimes they're just like, how do I get this script out to? I don't know other filmmakers. I mean, there's all these
Hmm.
barriers, right? And so one of the things I wanted to do with Prairie Lights Film Festival is be a mechanism in which writers could put their stuff in front of directors, and then directors could, we had like a script bank, right, where there's dozens of different scripts. A
Yep.
director could go through, they could find one and be like, all right, cool, I want to make this. And then the director would be put in contact with the screenwriter, and then they could collaborate, right? So if the director's like, this is a little too grandiose, I don't have access to these kinds of locations, how do we use the creative process to meld our minds together and come to a place where we're both happy and satisfied, and then I'll go out and make the movie, and then we will premiere this movie at the next film festival as part of a block of, hey, look at all these brand new world premieres. Kind of a way to cultivate filmmaking here in Nebraska. At least that's what I
Right.
attempted to do with it.
Right. For sure. Yeah.
And so,
Um.
oh, go ahead,
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, you're good. Go ahead.
And I was going to say, I wrote a script specifically for this script band. So the house on Peach Avenue, and it was supposed to be a found footage thing. That's how I envisioned it. I wrote the whole thing as a found footage. It was about this couple that shows up at this old farmhouse, and you see people running around on the ceilings, old creepy old ladies with long tongues and all this weird shit, right? And so Peter had selected that. We had kind of gotten to know each other a little bit, and so he had selected that. And one day I get a call. I don't know if it was a phone call or an email. He's like, "Hey, can we meet?" And so I met with him, and he's like, "I can't do this. I have to
Right.
I have to take the spirit of your script, and I need to rewrite it for myself in a way in which I can film it and that I feel comfortable and I feel passionate about doing it this
Right.
way." And he had the common courtesy to reach out to me and explain why. And I was like, absolutely, dude, take this and run with it, because this was a script that wasn't personal to me. It was a
Right.
script I wrote specifically because I wanted somebody else to do it, right? Hey, take it and run with it. And he took it and run, and I love how it all turned out. I rewatched that just the other day on YouTube, and I was like, this is just really cool. Like, he did a really, really good job with that. So that would be an example of, like, you've got to be able to let your script go in certain cases.
Yeah. If you're gonna write and then kind of hand your stuff over to um somebody else to make that, once you let that go, that's kind of no longer yours. If that makes sense. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like if you want to be part of the process and you want to stand on set and you want to do all that stuff, great. But once you kind of hand that over, that thing is no longer yours. And if you're super attached to it and nothing can change, don't give that away.
yeah, that's great advice.
Gonna happen. I was supposed to, I got it. For Flatwater Terrors, I was supposed to direct um, a short film that Tony wrote called, he didn't have a title for it. It ended up being titled or called Love Bites. Um,
Ah, okay,
and
yeah, yeah.
I chose it. I read it. I dug it. I was gonna direct it, and then I got down to having to actually do the pre-production and meet, and um I was like, I can't do this. Not in a million years. It was like a rom-com kind of with a horror element. And I was like, I can't fucking direct this. Like, not in a million years will I ever be able to do this. So I handed it off to a much more talented person that could wrap their hands around this, and they killed it. Like, it was one of
Yeah,
the
it turned
best
out really
things
good.
we've ever done, ever. And it was because I had the whereabouts hand it over to somebody that
Is
I just knew
is
that
is that on the Midnight Frights YouTube channel? Can people go see it right
it
now?
is on the Midnight Frights YouTube channel.
Okay.
Patrick Lambrecht did that. I knew Patrick for a while before we ever collaborated together, and he directs. He's a theater director. That's what he had done, and I think Love Bites was his first film he ever directed. And I had this like this thought in my head that if he directs theater, it's the same fucking thing. Like there should be like no he should be able to transition from that to this. It's just blocking and moving people around and working with actors and then you add a camera. And he fucking smashed it.
Yeah.
So
Way better than my first initial film, I'll tell you that.
oh my god, dude, like yeah.
He's very talented, yeah.
When I was there, the things that he would come up with as we went along, I was like, I would have never, it just would have never happened. So, in the rom com part of it, I was like, I'm not funny, nor am I romantic. Ask my wife. So, I was like, if this was just a straight horror, I'd be like, let's do it. But I knew
Yeah.
there are elements I could not tackle ever,
Yeah,
and show Tony, and without Tony being like, dude, never again. So,
yeah, so the writing process, like the idea stage, I think we've sort of covered it. It could come from anywhere, right? It could come from something
right,
you look at, you watch a movie. You said, for example, the films that you're doing now, Hatchet's a big influence on them. So I'm sure you took
oh
some
my,
elements
yeah,
from that. Or it could just be like, hey, we're sitting here and a spark of create. It could be a simple line of dialogue from your significant other. Hey, can you
right,
shut the deadbolt? Make sure it's locked. It could be something like that. And I don't think anybody throughout history, no matter how many philosophers or artists have come in, nobody knows exactly where that creative spark comes from. It just kind of comes out of the ether sometimes. And I certainly feel like that's how it works with me. Like, I'll be like, oh, that'd be a cool idea.
right.
Uh, and here's the other thing. At least with me, I won't speak for you, but I have tons of ideas, but a lot of the ideas I don't feel passionate about. It doesn't lead me to suddenly go, okay, I want to turn on my computer and I want to spend an hour or two sort of beginning the writing process and coming up with
Mhm.
ideas. And that's the thing. I think there are creative. I think all people to a certain extent are creative individuals because I think every human being at some point has had an idea, a new idea. They might have, it could have been thought of by somebody else, independent of them, somewhere else. Because I do that all the time. Like, this would be a cool idea, and then I found out, oh, somebody else already came up with it, right?
Right.
Every human being has come up with something, even if they tell you no, no matter how small it is. But the real creative people who have a drive for it, that's what they love. They love coming up with a creative idea, and then they
Mhm.
love expanding on that and trying to bring that thing into the world. Because it's one thing, in my opinion, to have an idea. It's another thing to tell somebody about that idea, to then sort of, okay, how do I get this thing that popped up into my head into existence, right? Kind of like your script. How do you get there? And that's what sets creative people off against just people who are creative who don't have the passion to turn it into anything. They don't want to. They don't have the passion for it. They might have other focus, and people like you and I think we just have like, God, I got to get this out there somewhere.
Right.
I at least have to write it down so it's somewhere, at the
Right.
very least.
So kind of a segue into, because you started talking about this and brought it up. One of the things that my wife kind of threw out there and asked me, and I think it's kind of a good question, is what kind of inspires or motivates you to get up every day and write? For what reason? If it's not money, if it's not fame, if it's not all those things that other people kind of get up for, what makes you do it?
Yeah. So for anybody listening, and I think I can speak for Josh on this. We've never made a dime when it comes to any of this stuff.
Nope.
I, for example, I said last podcast, yeah, we went to conventions and we made some money at conventions. I never saw any of that money. That money never went into a bank account of mine. That money immediately was dropped into another film. So it's not like we've ever really made anything from this stuff. So the
Right.
the idea is, why do you do the things that you do? And for me personally, it's and I make this argument to people, and people find this. I don't know if it blows their mind, but they find it kind of funny when I say this. Life is inherently boring and tedious and mind-numbing, right?
Ooh,
Why
agreed.
why do people play video games? Why do people watch movies? Why do people go travel? Why do people do any of this stuff? It's because if they just sat around, is life is boring as shit. there's there's
Yep.
there's nothing to do, and I personally would rather do something that I find interesting. I
Mhm.
find writing stuff interesting. I find this kind of thing to be able to have a creative idea and do some sort of outlet with it, whether it's movies or I was in a few rock bands, just writing a
Mhm.
song, doing that kind of stuff. It sort of alleviates the tedium of everyday life for me personally,
Right.
because I don't want to just sit around and twiddle my thumbs. Like if I was born in 1855, like what would I have done? Right? I probably would have written for a newspaper, or I would have tried to write a book, or something of that nature.
Right.
Because I want to be, I just want to do something. I want to do something that makes me feel good,
Mhm.
and that's why I do it.
Yeah. It's same thing. Like um, uh, I I feel like creative people, whether you paint or write a book or a play or a movie or whatever you do, it's the inability to not do it. It'd be easier to get up and go to a museum or read a book or watch a movie or go to the theater. Way easier than getting up and doing it yourself. Um, but I think it's our inability to not do it. For me, it's like a shot of heroin to the brain. It just, I have to do it. I've tried to quit. I've tried 100 times
So have I. So
um,
have I.
to just get up and be like, today I'm not going to do it. Today I'd rather sit around and watch TV all day. And then a few hours into that, it's like, fuck, I've got to, I've something hit me in my
I
brain,
have an idea.
and I know where to go. What's that?
I have an idea.
Yeah, though, it's just I wish it'd be easier to stop. It'd be easier to quit. You think, but it's just not.
Yeah, and I wonder. I've never looked into this. We both have ADHD brains. I wonder how
Right.
many creative people who who have feel the compulsion to do something like this have brains like ours. If there's just physiologically something wired differently in the brains of creative people, like for
Mhm.
example, I'll use like my mom, right? She was the same way. My mom used to draw all the time, and she's a creative person. But I do know people, like multiple stepdads I've had in my life. They're not creative in the slightest. They don't care. They would rather just watch football or do something of that nature. Not, and again, I'm not somebody who's anti-sports. So any sports listeners out there, sports are awesome. Fuck all those people that say sports suck and sports
Right.
ball and blah. That's stupid bullshit. People like what
Right.
they like, and you can like multiple things. That's my side tangent rant there. But watching football, I would not say is a creative outlet for my brain. I kind of like watching players excel or Michael Jordan or something like that, but I'm not getting anything creative out of that. I'm more
Right.
admiring the way that the game is played and getting some excitement out of watching these people at the pinnacle and the peak of their physical prowess doing all these crazy cool things that I could not do myself. But with the creative drive, it's like my brain just goes like I just can't not do it because I'm always thinking about it. I am
Mhm.
constantly thinking about it, and that's one of the things with ADHD, right? There's a thing called hyper focus. You start
Right.
hyper focusing on shit, and I start hyper focusing on the idea and getting that out there and things of that nature. And so that's kind of where I just think our brains are wired differently. Honestly, I just think
Yeah.
they are, and I think to try to explain it to someone whose brain is not wired the same way and who doesn't understand and can't be in our sort of perspective, it's like almost talking to a wall because I don't know how to describe it. I'm just like this is just how I am, right? Another quick side tangent. When tingles down your spine was imploding, I had an individual. I was explaining to someone that that I was very stressed out, and I was trying to explain to him how much stress was on me. And the individual said, "Well, just stop being stressed. You don't need to worry about this stuff. It's other people." And to me, when someone says that, it just makes me mad because I'm like, I can't stop. If I could stop being stressed, don't you think I would? It's like
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't. Like my brain does not operate like that. My brain is constantly going all over the place at all times. That is what ADHD is. It's just that's a thing, and it's hard. It's hard to do, and it's hard to explain that to someone who doesn't have that problem.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that. I don't even know what we were talking about. That's kind of where I'm going at with
It
that.
was the question was motivation, but I mean,
Yeah,
like,
it's my weird ass brain.
yeah,
that's
that's
my
pretty much it.
that's my motivation. My weird ass brain.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've basically covered all the big points, at least for us, of how
Yeah.
we get ideas, how we start putting. Let's get into a few technical things before we wrap up this cast. Let's talk about technical stuff. Like, there's going to be people out there who are writers who are like, man, what do I do? What kind of programs do I use?
Oh yeah.
How do I, how did you, Josh, when you first started writing a script, before you knew about screenwriting software, which we can touch on, but before you knew any of that, how did you write a story or a script that you wanted to turn into something? What was your mode and mechanism in which that you did that?
So I it's so dumb. I hand wrote everything.
Wow.
So I'm not even kidding. I have notebooks full of everything that's just handwritten when I first kind of started. And then like Word, like I would just kind of I found the how you outline or how you the format that you'd have to write a script in, and we just do it in like Word or whatever. But like I wasn't Final Draft existed when I kind of started writing. So I started on Final Draft and wrote with that for a little while, and I hate Final Draft. I just don't like
Oh,
it.
so do I. I hate it.
Um, Now I write with Celtics. Celtics is free, um, free for so much. Like you can write up to 3 screenplays on Celtics for free. So I use Celtics right now.
Real
It,
quick,
it
as a side
Right.
note, should remind me to tell you, I have a version of Celtics from like 10 years ago, which is unlimited. So I'll get a copy of that and I'll give it to you.
Yeah. Well, side note: when we get off this, I'll tell you how I cheat Celtics.
Okay.
Um, so I don't fucking care. So yeah, it'll let you write up to 3 screenplays at a time. And I love Celtics because again, when I started, I didn't know how to format. I knew when you write a play, it's different formatting. Celtics will format everything for you,
Yes, it's a
which
godsend.
is fantastic. It just does it for you. You don't have to really think about it. Um, and then it comes with a bunch of other stuff. Like if you want to storyboard and you want to do all this extra stuff, Celtics for me is like the champion writing program. So that's what I use.
I 100% agree with you. I've been a proponent of this program. Man, I mean, when I originally started writing, I never wrote scripts fully out by hand. That to me, that's insane. I would never,
It,
because I'm like I'd have to transcribe it all again for
yeah.
everybody else. Like on, so I always started with. Strangely enough, originally I would write scripts out in emails, and then I would like email them to myself. I don't know why
Oh shit. Okay.
I don't know why I did that because it seems kind of silly and stupid. But for whatever reason, when I first started, I would do that kind of stuff. But then, of course, I went to Microsoft Word, and then I would just write everything in Microsoft Word. Today, I use Celtics. I don't know if it's Celtics or Celtics. I don't actually know how it's pronounced because I've heard some people say Celtics and other people say Celtics.
Gotcha.
It's CELTX. I assume
Hmm.
.com, and I recommend people go in there. Like Josh said, when you first start up, you can pick whether or not you want to be like in play format or like TV episode format or movie
Yep.
format, and that's how it'll format everything out to you. So if you do write a script and you send it to script writing festivals and stuff like that, a lot of times they'll just reject it out of hand if it's not in the proper format. So
Hmm.
it's a good thing to be able to do that. Maybe we can touch base. Have you ever submitted a script to a screenwriting festival or anything like that?
I have not. I've come close a couple times, but I just couldn't do it. So
Yeah, I've never done that either because personally, I feel like festivals are a racket. That's a whole different conversation. I don't want to
yeah,
spend $50 for someone to not even look at my script and throw it in the trash.
right.
But that's a whole separate side tangent.
That's
Um,
another podcast.
that is a whole. Oh yeah, that'll be something. Festivals. That
Yep.
podcast we can go on for hours for that one. So with screenwriting, Celtics is great. And now what drives me crazy is when you, for example, with Tony and Lisa, they don't use Celtics. They use something completely different. So it's like they will send me a script. It's in a different, because every screenwriting program has slightly different formats. I can't just cut and
Mhm.
paste and put their shit in a Celtics thing. And so then you have to get on the same screenwriting program essentially with other
Yep.
writers, and they might not be used to and familiar with it. That's kind of annoying and whatnot. But I always tell everybody up front, I use Celtics. That's what I use. Figure it out. Like
Right.
you're gonna have to get in here and figure it out. And the cool thing about Celtics is people can log in and they can make comments and notes on your script, and all sorts. There's like a note
Yeah.
function.
You
It's
you can you can share. You can share.
yes,
So two people can write on the same thing.
yeah, it's a wonderful product. So if
Yeah.
you're doing screenwriting, I think we both recommend that. And if you wanted to graduate to something a little bit quote unquote more professional into Final Pro and all that stuff, you can do that, but you'll have like a nice base foundation done in Celtics first. And like,
Hmm.
okay, now I can go and I kind of learn the way that things are formatted. I'm seeing how things are formatted. I can take that into more professional pro style stuff. But for now, like for example, the novel that I'm writing, YouTube is a godsend because there are a bunch of different like novel writing programs because this is much different to write like a novel than it is from a film script. So
Hmm.
there's stuff like Scrivener. I think Tony uses Scrivener for the books that he writes, but I didn't want to actually like pay for a service because I'm like I'm just writing my first novel. I don't want to spend a bunch. I don't want to throw a bunch of money at it, and then because I am such a slow writer, it could be a month or two before I get to the next chapter, for example. So I don't want to pay for that. So I went on YouTube, and YouTube has a ton of resources for writers, screenwriters, novelists, and you know, this writer was like, I do everything in Google Docs, and Google Docs has templates and stuff that you can write novels in, and so I'm writing my novel in Google Docs actually right now.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's not on a hard drive that I could lose everything if it dies. It's in the cloud. And I know Celtics now has where you can log in and all the stuff saved in their cloud and stuff like that as well. So,
Right. Yeah.
and I'd always recommend if you do something on a hard drive, like I have the old version of Celtics where it was just free from the beginning. There was no limitations to the amount of stuff that you could do. You could just fire up the program and write as many scripts as you want. I still use that, and with that, every time I write a new draft of a script, I email it to myself. So I'm like draft,
Yep.
2.0 with the date, and I send that and I email it to myself because I'm like, if my, like today, literally today, my computer blue screened right before I was about to jump on this with Josh, and I was like, oh my god, and I'm trying to like figure out. I back everything up on the cloud now, just so I have it. I send stuff when I was doing Tingle's scripts. I sent them all to Tony. I was like, Tony, if I were to die in a car crash tomorrow, you have all of the scripts.
Yep.
You have
Yep.
backups of everything. I entrust you to keep my shit in the event anything were to go horribly awry. So, yeah, so that's kind of what I use and what you use. Do you have any other further comments on software to use or the nuts and bolts of actually writing the script?
No. Like I said, I Celtics is champion. For new writers, I just like me doing that handwriting thing where I would write it out by hand. First allowed me to, and I'm not saying go ahead and don't be dumb like me and write a whole fucking script out by hand, but when I did that, it did allow me to go back. Like me writing it in the program was second draft. Um,
Yeah, that's a good way to
it
look at
allowed
it.
me to change everything. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, program wise, no, there's nothing for me to. There's nothing else for me to recommend. I just go Celtics. So,
Yeah. The other thing that I will mention is that I know you and I have done this in the past, whereas we just jump on Facebook, when we're both up, our ADHD brains again are up at 1 o'clock in the morning because we can't sleep, right? And we
Right.
just bounce different ideas off of each other. Like we had before COVID hit, we were bouncing around an idea for a found footage movie,
Mm-hmm.
which I still think is a cool idea, and I still think that we should revisit it at some point in time because I think the idea it was kind of the idea of found footage, but at two like running concurrently, but at two different time periods. And
Right.
so that was what the film was. It was just trying to piece together what is happening here, and then you would find out as you sort of progress through this various thing. And that was a cool idea, and that was just from jumping on and saying, "Hey, you know, how do we come up with something? Well, how about this? And
Right.
what if it was found footage? And what could we do? We have access to this location, so what could we do?" And that's a great way to come up with ideas. And then I think we
Yeah.
had started a Celtics thing or something.
We definitely have a Celtics thing going. Yeah.
Yeah, but shit, we probably haven't got to that in like 2 years because COVID killed it. I was like, well, personally, I wasn't going to film anything during COVID. And so Tingles probably would have died anyway because I still probably wouldn't have been filming anything in 2021 certainly. So
Yeah.
that's kind of gosh, those are all the questions that I had for you. I think we covered all of my questions. Did
Yeah.
did your wonderful wife have any additional questions that she wanted to throw out?
I think we covered everything she brought up. I have two like fun questions, so they're not really for writing advice or anything. I just have two kind of fun questions that I want to know. Um, and I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask you anyway. If you're like, we're not going to talk about it because you don't want to say the title, then I totally understand. What's your favorite script you ever wrote that you never shot?
Oh, I can't say the title, but
Okay,
I
I
get
know the answer to that question.
okay,
So
okay.
that was unfair, but I threw the
That's
answer
fine.
anyway.
That's fine.
So I was like, all right, I'm gonna throw out the old hook and see if I can reel it in. Couldn't do it. All right. But I know the answer to that question, so I don't. Who cares if nobody else
Yeah,
knows?
what I will say, and there's two scripts that I have that I'm very, very proud of, and that I definitely wanted to turn into something someday if I could. If that question I threw out to you last week was, if you could have all the finances that you wanted, what films would you make? And I have two films. One's a western, and one's kind of like a film noir that involves like magic and all kinds of crazy
Hmm.
stuff. And
Yep.
and that's the one that I love and I adore. But I also have a
Yep.
western that I really, and again, I think the title of it's great, so I don't really want to give it out for everybody to hear on
Right.
YouTube.
Right.
But if I had the money, I would make those. I would drop everything and I would make these movies because I'm like, these are good. These are scripts that I look at. I'm like, I did a fucking good job on these, man. And
Right.
and there's stuff in here that I don't think I'd want to get out because I think it's really unique, and I wouldn't want another filmmaker to steal it and do and take something. And so there's a couple scripts, yes, for sure, that I
Right.
have that I'd be like, oh, I'd love to make these.
All right. Two other questions because I know we're gonna hit the 2 hour mark here soon, so I'll make them quick. They can be quick answers, and then we can just bomb out of this shit. Uh, you make horror films. That's what you've made. Outside of that genre, what kind of if you couldn't make a horror film, what kind of film would you make?
Hmm. I'm gonna take a little bit of issue with your first point there because I've thought about
Okay,
this a lot.
sure.
Do I make horror films? I'm not sure that I do. And
Okay,
I'm not sure I've ever actually made an actual horror film in the
okay,
traditional sense of a horror film. I feel like all of the films that I've made have had kind of like, I mean, horror. Let me backtrack a little bit. Horror as a big sort of umbrella term, where you could have a Serbian film on one side and you could have Joe Dante's The Burbs on the other, all fitting under
right.
the giant umbrella.
Okay,
Yes, yes, I would concede almost all of my stuff could fit under that giant horror umbrella. But in term,
that's fair.
but in terms of taking like making an actual horror film, I'll be honest, I'm too scared to make one
Okay,
because I don't feel like I could do it. All of my films are either mysteries or they have a comedic element to them or they are so like over the top ridiculous like an 80s splatter film sort of thing where it's like okay these aren't scary by any means. To me a true horror film is a scary film. I do not know how to make a scary film, and I'm too scared to try to make a scary film, because if I try to make a film that's actually scary, I
Hmm.
feel like I'm going to fail miserably. It's going to be the most boring shit you've ever watched in your life, and it's going to be a
Fair.
complete and utter failure. Even the great masters of horror, Wes Craven, if you want to say, like John Carpenter, they make like one
Hmm.
or two, maybe two if they're lucky, truly scary films, and then the rest of their filmography, they're chasing that and never catching it, because once you've scared someone in a specific way, and I exclude jump scares because those are physiological responses. Those aren't I'm terrified. It's like,
Right.
if I'm walking down the street and a car backfires, I'm going to jump. That's a jump scare. Same thing when
Right.
a loud noise in a horror movie. It's the same sort of thing. But to truly put together a group of images in scenes in such a way that you're watching it and you know it's fake. You know you're watching something artificially created here, but your brain forgets it. I don't know how to do that. So I don't think I've ever actually made a horror film. I think I've made entertaining, like entertainment that just happens to fall under the big umbrella of the term horror. But what was your question? See, I've already forgotten.
No, it's you kind of. I mean, there's a you made it into a two-part question, which is kind of fucking unfair. The what genre would you
Oh,
want to write in
what I
if you?
want to write in.
Yeah.
I feel like I love sort of um, supernatural type stuff, right? So I would do science fiction. If I wasn't
Okay.
doing like horror, I'd probably do science fiction. But I do love like film noir. I would do a straight film noir. I think that'd be fantastic. Or a western. I mean, I love the western genre. I
Okay.
would definitely do a western if I had a big budget western. I mean, I've done one already in Chills Down Your Spine, but
Hmm.
I loved how it turned out. I would do some sort of crime, sci-fi, or western.
Cool.
Maybe all three of them together. How about that? Let's
Yeah.
create a brand new genre.
Mash it all. The last kind of question I have, I
Well, wait,
guess.
wait, wait. What genre would you work in? Because you've done basically explicitly horror for most of it, right? So, what genres would you like to play in?
Well, I've written um during the height of COVID, I got super, like everybody, I'm sure across the world, got super depressed, and horror films were just not helping. So I wrote a rom com during COVID, um, which was fun. Um, and comedies. I'm not funny. Don't get me wrong. I will start this by saying I'm not funny.
Neither am
Um,
I.
but I know a lot of people that are really funny, and I felt like if I could get the idea on paper, I could throw things out to people that are funny, and they could punch it up with actual funny shit. So, um, uh, comedy is probably something that I'd like to hang around in.
Okay.
I always promised that I would make something that my wife um, would be able to watch and not just be like grossed out or wondering why the fuck she married that person. Um, so comedy was one of those things that I was like, okay, well, I could write a comedy and I could show
Yeah.
that to my wife, and she may be like, I'm less inclined to divorce this person.
Yeah,
So,
it's funny. Obviously, we don't have the time to talk about it now, but possibly in a
right.
future show. It When it comes to horror specifically, it's very interesting because like we talked a little bit earlier, like where do the ideas come from? And there's been times in my life when I've questioned like why do I find enjoyment out of watching other people suffer in a horror film?
Right,
Like, what does that say about me as a person that I come
right.
up with these crazy, like yesterday, right? I was reading your script and I sent you messages. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if you drew this thing out a little bit more and basically just tortured the shit out of this
Right.
character? And I'm like, why? Why does my brain go to that? You
And I read that note. I was like, oh my god, yeah, we're doing that. I'm fucking people. So so it was immediate. I was like, I'm doing that. I'm stealing this shit. But yeah, that's if I'm not fucking with people, I like to listen to people laugh. So yeah.
Cool, cool.
The last kind of thing I had, and I don't know like how to really word this question, but I'm gonna give it a fucking shot anyway, because who cares? What is one thing in every Dead Lantern script? Is there something that's always kind of like the staple of Dead Lantern? Like you read, if you send that script out and don't put Dead Lantern on it, and you hand it to somebody, that person can go, "Oh, that's a Dead Lantern script."
Oh, that's a. No one's ever asked me that question before. Hmm. Man, so last week you hit me with a question that I couldn't really answer, which was, I think, I don't know if it was a sequel question or something I'd want to remake.
Yeah,
And this is another interesting question. I don't know. Do I have
we
an
could
actual style? I
we could
guess
table it though. We can table it. We could do a segment in the future that says questions I couldn't fucking answer the first time, and
I
then
like
we'll
that.
revisit them. If
I
you want
like
to do
that.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Just make sure you make a note of it because I'll forget about the questions.
Oh, I got all
Um,
this shit written down.
yeah, that is really interesting because I don't know like if no one's ever told me I have a particular style.
Hmm.
Like I've had people read my scripts before, but no one ever said, "Oh yeah, that's a Matthew Keister script."
Right.
I could tell. If your name and everything was off it, I knew it was yours. So I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, that'd be more of a question for you. I mean, you've read some of my scripts before. Have you noticed any sort of commonality? I mean, I have like for my stories, I do have a the thing that would come to mind, I guess, would I do have a specific lore and a whole backstory. Like all of my films are in the same sort of cinematic universe. So
That's a good
there
answer.
there will be callbacks to other characters. Other characters will cross over. This all gets back to
Hmm.
my love of Stephen King and stuff of like that. There will be that kind of stuff that people might be able to pick up on. But I don't know. Is there anything in the scripts that you read of mine that you're like, oh yeah, I could tell that's a director or a writer's trait that he puts that in there.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it because I think going back to maybe it was Outpost Doom. I don't think the Grand Horror had anything. I think Outpost Doom is really what started, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. That cinematic Dead Lantern universe because I feel like you have callbacks all the way back to that one.
Yeah. So
And
when the Grand Horror was originally written, I wrote it with this whole sort of universe backstory in
mhm,
mind. And then as I went forward in my filmmaking career, I was like, and people were like, "Oh, you're just like Marvel." Well, this is pre-Marvel, and it's not like I was reinventing the wheel here. Like Stephen King did this. I stole this kind of cross-pollinating things from Stephen King, if anybody. But I love the idea of having a huge. I mean, I even brought Remission into my cinematic
yep.
universe. Like Remission is in it because one of my
Mhm,
films involves the Remission characters, and I came up with a whole backstory as to how like there is a literal start, which a little bit of a spoiler here. My novel deals with the beginnings of everything, of all of this universe, goes back hundreds of years, and the beginnings of all of this stuff that goes around and is like an interplay and is weaved through all of the various films that I've done. The backstory of all these characters and where they came from, and like there's this whole idea of this darkness that's covering the earth, and it's created all of these. It's basically made legends real. So in the Grand Horror, for example, there's a darkness that sort of traps all these people into this theater. And what I wanted, I was like, okay, so in the real world, spoiler alert, ghosts are not real. There's no such thing as a ghost. You and I went to the Villisca Axe Murder House. We spent the
mhm.
night. There are no ghosts. The thing is not haunted. However, I was like, what happens if there was an event that happened that made these things real? Like they're not. They're just stories people tell. But when something happens, boom, suddenly there is an axe wielding ghost in that house that runs around chopping people up. Or suddenly now monsters do exist, in these various things. And so I wrote this whole thing with the Grand Horror and not even knowing if I'd ever make another movie. I had no idea if I'd ever do this again. And when Outpost Doom came around, I was like, you know what? I wanna keep this in the whole same thing. Isabel is like the prologue to the Grand Horror and Outpost Doom. Different characters cross pollinate with each other, and even the shorts and shivers and chills are all sort of tied in and part of it. So I guess that's what I would say to your question. Long story short,
Right.
they might pick up on the lore and characters that have the same last names in families and things of that nature, and be like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, that's a Matt script.
Yeah. I think that's a great answer. I think that's the you know um
That's the way
yeah,
the cookie crumbles.
yeah, it's the best answer you can throw out there. So yeah, that's all my questions, man. I just had a couple fun ones I thought I'd throw at you. So.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I think, man, that's another 2-hour show. So
Yeah.
we're gonna go ahead and wrap this up, and let everybody know. Stick around for next week, same time on the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel. We're gonna have another topic. Again, we don't ever figure out what it is till like shortly before, it seems. Maybe we'll work on putting out an outline or something of, okay, here's what we want to hit in whatever order. Something maybe we want to go out of order. Maybe we want to talk about the editing process. Who knows what we're going to decide.
Yeah.
But you can come back next week and you will listen to us hobnob about all of these various experiences. You can send us an email at outpostunknown@gmail.com if you're interested in a topic that you want us to discuss even more. Maybe there's something in one of these episodes that you're like, hey, can you go on a side tangent? I'd like to know a little bit more about this. We'd be happy to do that. And yeah, I have nothing else.
Still won't have a name.
Yeah, we might not. At some point, we're going to have a name. And that might be episode 6 or 7. And then we're going to be like, hello, welcome to this podcast. But hopefully you guys will know it before then. So with that, goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.